David, at 8 years old, was enjoying his second summer at Cityside Day Camp. He loved the camp's activities, from games and swimming to spending time with the counselors. As the summer drew to a close, each age group was scheduled to perform short skits or plays for the entire camp, with parents invited to watch. In the recreation hall, Rachel, the drama counselor, outlined their group's performance. Camp owner Jack Nathan, along with the Mohawk counselors, observed as Rachel explained that they would be performing a song. They would be paired up, with half of them playing boys and the other half playing girls. David, who had only half listened, heard the word girls and assumed he would definitely be one of the boys. Andy, the senior Mohawk counselor, stood up and asked if any of the boys wanted to volunteer to play the girls. David paid closer attention as Andy emphasized the need for volunteers, or he would choose the girls himself. Nervously, David glanced around, hoping someone else would step forward, but no one did. "All right," Andy said, "I'll pick the first girl." He paused, then pointed directly at David. "Moose will be our first girl." The boys laughed, and David's face flushed with embarrassment. Andy's nickname for him, Moose, was far from flattering. David was mortified. Why had Andy chosen him for this role? He looked at his friends, feeling deeply embarrassed. Andy continued to call out names, and while some boys protested or looked fearful, others accepted their roles with humor or bravado. David, however, was desperate to avoid his role as the first girl. He had no idea how to handle the situation. Andy remained unsympathetic to the boys who requested a switch, while Jack Nathan watched with a smile as each boy was assigned a female role. Jack Nathan, who founded Cityside Day Camp 15 years ago, was a phys ed teacher and award-winning coach. David recalled a time when Jack had appeared at the camp pool wearing his wife's bathing suit, and everyone had laughed, assuming it was just a joke. It wasn't unusual for boys at camp to dress up as girls for performances. One year, they were hula girls, another year, ballerinas. The parents saw nothing odd about this tradition, given Jack's reputation as an educator and coach. However, few realized that Jack had a personal interest in these performances, using them to indulge his own peculiar interests. David chose not to tell his parents that he had been selected to play a girl in the camp show. He felt too embarrassed to share the news, fearing they might think the counselors saw him as less capable than the other boys. He worried they would think it was fair for him to play a girl, since he couldn't measure up. In the days leading up to the performance, Rachel had the Mohawk boys practice their song, pairing them up as they performed the old tune Cecilia. The song was about newfound love, and the boys sang about winning Cecilia's heart. David and the other boys playing girls were instructed to make eye contact and act out their roles with dramatic flair. Jack frequently appeared during rehearsals and costume fittings, making sure each boy tried on their dress and shoes, labeling each with their assigned name. David planned to skip camp on the day of the show, intending to tell his mother he was sick. He hoped this would allow him to avoid dressing up as a girl. However, his mother, seeing through his excuse, asked, "What's wrong, dear? If you stay home, I'll miss your brother's performance, and he'll be disappointed. Is there something bothering you about the show?" Though David should have confided in his mother, he was too embarrassed to explain. Believing he might persuade one of the other boys to switch roles, he reluctantly agreed to go. After lunch, long before the show began, all the Mohawk girls were instructed to go to Jack's house. Despite David's panic and attempts to avoid the situation, he followed along. Inside, Rachel, Jack's wife Muriel, and another female counselor waited. The boys were asked to change into their underwear, and David was given a white petticoat and tights, with instructions on how to wear them. They were dressed in white gowns with pastel lace and a vintage style, and David's face reddened as Rachel buttoned his dress and tied his sash. The boys were then seated for makeup application. David squirmed as lipstick was applied, mascara stung his eyes, and eyeshadow was difficult to endure. Rouge was applied to their cheeks, and they were given bonnets with blonde curls. As David looked in the mirror, he hoped that with all the makeup and costume, no one would recognize him. He convinced himself he could claim he was still a boy, and for the first time, he began to feel somewhat comfortable in the outfit. Rachel instructed them to remain seated and avoid dirtying their dresses. Jack circulated the room, offering lemonade and observing each boy's transformation closely. David noticed the lipstick marks on his cup, similar to his mother's. Unaware of Jack's true intentions, David sat for an hour and a half under Jack's scrutiny. Jack's interest in dressing the boys up as hula girls and ballerinas went beyond his role as an educator and camp head. Although he never physically touched the children, Jack's behavior was a violation of trust, compromising the well-being of the camp's attendees for his own gratification. The girls were finally called to take the stage for their performance. They reunited with the rest of the Mohawks and paired up with their assigned boys. David felt awkward in his dress, the petticoat swished uncomfortably around his legs. As they approached the rec hall, some fourth-grade boys burst into laughter, and a fifth-grade girl recognized her brother in the girl's costume, shouting at him. David's face turned crimson when he realized two girls from his school had spotted him and were laughing. As it was time to perform, the audience erupted in laughter as each pair climbed onto the stage. David saw his mother waving and felt as though he was trapped in a nightmare. His cheeks burned with embarrassment. Finally, the performance ended, and the Mohawks headed outside. Ice cream bars were offered to the performers, but David refused, wanting nothing more than to remove the dress, wipe off the lipstick, and forget the whole ordeal. He took off his bonnet and scrubbed at his makeup with napkins. Even after changing back into his clothes, the mascara and eyeshadow smudged stubbornly, leaving a clear mark of their roles. At home, David's family remained silent about his performance, sensing he had no intention of discussing it. The boys at camp continued to tease the girls throughout the summer, and David faced teasing at school as well. His friends would taunt him by humming the song from the show. To deflect, David insisted he hadn't played a girl in the show, despite knowing everyone knew the truth. Over time, the sting of the experience faded. David resolved never to dress in girls' clothes again and decided not to return to City-side day camp. However, when his family went to see the film Some Like It Hot, David was shocked to see Tony Curtis and Jack Lemmon dressed as women. He couldn't understand why they would do that or if they had been forced. Soon after, David had a recurring dream where he was back at camp. Andy asked if any boys wanted to play girls in the show, and this time David raised his hand. Instead of laughing, the boys admired him for his bravery. Occasionally, David dreamed of being in situations where he was compelled to dress as a girl, such as falling into a lake and being offered a girl's clothes to wear home. In these dreams, he would ask to be made to look like a real girl to avoid embarrassment, and the girl always complied happily. David couldn't grasp why he had these dreams or why any male would dress as a girl. On Halloween, he saw a boy in a pale blue dress, complete with a wig and makeup. As David's friends mocked him, he remained silent but was struck by a surprising thought: he wished he could dress that way. Several years passed and David continued to have these dreams. He continued to concoct fantasies in which he'd be dressed up as a girl. He never did so and thought he never would. A cousin asked him to dress as a girl one Halloween. David was terrified at the thought, but secretly he wished she'd make him. Finally, when David was 13, he was home alone one night. He saw a skirt on a hanger and slipped it on. He thought that he'd just try it. No one would know. He pulled it on and then off. In his mind, his experiment was over. He felt nothing and swore he'd never try it again. He was home alone the next Saturday night and he felt an uncontrollable urge to try dressing up again. However, he thought that the only way to purge it out of him would be to dress up completely in girls' clothes. He needed to wear everything: nylons, a slip, a bra, a dress to feel complete. And if he felt complete, he'd never need to do it again. He found a yellow chiffon dress and put on each garment. The nylons in particular felt nice against the slip. The chiffon glided over his body and David realized that it felt wonderful. He looked in the mirror. A 13-year-old boy, dressed as a girl, stared back. David, frightened at his reflection, tore off everything and retreated back into pants. He'd never do that again. Never. He made a solemn promise. David kept the promise for at least a week when he tried on more girls' things. Again, he promised himself he'd never do it again. And again he broke his promise. Again and again. 2 years later, David read A Catcher in the Rye. Holden Caulfield described a man who he observed through a hotel window. This man was alone in a room and he slowly dressed himself up as a woman. He gazed at himself in the mirror as he put on each article of clothing. Once he was dressed, the man watched himself walk back and forth and he made deliberate feminine movements in this evening dress. David was thunderstruck. This man was doing what he did. Only it sounded creepy. David realized that perhaps he wasn't the only boy in the world who liked to put on girls' things. He didn't know who these transvestites were or why they crossdressed, nor did he even know those words. In his heart, he knew that he liked girls, that he wasn't a creep or a pervert, but then why did he like to do that perverted thing? David wouldn't know the answer for many years. He snuck about through the rest of his childhood in women's closets, never appearing in public in women's clothes. No one ever saw him. He'd become a husband and a dad, and he never got over the fact that either by accident or conspiracy, or perhaps because Andy found his soul transparent and could see that he, David, secretly wanted to dress as a girl, and therefore forced David onto that stage and humiliated him to his core.